week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal. The Black Moon Clan is continuing their plan to capture Chibiusa, destroy the legendary Silver Crystal, and to abduct all of the Sailor Senshi. Before you guys watch my review, check out my review of the newest episode of Death Parade. It's right here. Check it out. Alright. Sorry for the shameless plug-in, but I just gotta recommend Death Parade. It's an amazing anime series. So, this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal was actually pretty good. In fact, this second arc is way better than the first arc in many different ways. One, I love the villains, the Black Moon Clan. They just have a lot of style. I love their headquarters with the big giant black crystal of doom and all the weird dark energy constantly erupting into the sky. Although I do have to admit, it is a little cliche that they're deciding to keep Sailor Mars around, even though they could just offer right now and it would probably help them out in the long run, but whatever. The point is, this week's episode is very similar to the last, except that unlike last week's where they focused on Sailor Mars, this week they focus on Sailor Mercury, which is pretty important because not only did we get a little bit of characterization with her, but we also get probably some of the best action scenes seen in the entire series thus far. There's also a little bit of story with Chibiusa this week. She's pretty much underwhelmed by Sailor Moon's power, and she still seems to just completely hate her in every way, and she tries to escape and go to this park, but she's found by Tuxedo Mask, who puts on this ridiculously cheesy puppet show for her, and he calls it ventriloquism. I call it just puppetry, because you couldn't even see the dude. I don't even think he's a very good ventriloquist, but that's beside the point. The point is, Mamoru Chiba, Tuxedo Mask, sort of comes across as like a father figure for Chibiusa, and again, I believe that is where the series is going. I believe that Chibiusa is actually from the future, and that this is actually her parents. She doesn't just quite realize it quite yet, or maybe it's because they're so young, she doesn't believe that it's actually them. So what type of monster is Rita Repulsa gonna send to fight the Power Rangers this week? Well, actually, it's another member of the Spectre Sisters, Berthier, and she's basically a water woman, very similar to Sailor Mercury, which of course means they're going to fight each other, and they actually had this weird, like, battle chess match at first. She sort of calls her out, and this is an important scene, and it does have some clumsy exposition, because there is a scene previous where we do get to learn that Sailor Mercury's parents are divorced, and she doesn't really go any farther into that, but still, she learned a lot of really important things from her father, like learning how to play chess, which definitely comes into play in this week's episode. But while they're actually playing the game, Berthier is getting under Sailor Mercury's skin and trying to let her know that no matter what happens, people are just going to leave you and their love means nothing, and she's basically opening up a brand new wound in her heart, which reminds her of her father leaving, which is honestly a very messed up scene. But then she's reminded that her friends always have her back, and no matter what, she would always remember her father's love and the teachings that he actually gave her, and that allows her to win the match, and that's when you suddenly realize that everybody in the audience is a member of the frickin' Putty Patrol, and this is when everybody starts fighting, and this is definitely the best part about this week's episode, which was the action scene, and Sailor Mercury is awesome. I already love the fact that she's basically wearing like an advanced form of a scouter scene from Dragon Ball Z, but I especially love how she starts making clones of herself, and there's water erupting all over the place, and ice, but then you have Berthier, who does this really cool move where she does this backflip and ends up creating this massive torrent of water, which ends up catching Sailor Mercury, but then Sailor Moon comes in, saves the day with another one-shot attack, which frankly is kind of disappointing, and just like the last episode, Rubius shows up out of nowhere and makes a quick escape with Sailor Mercury. We already have two members of the Sailor Senshi down, and I imagine that's what the next couple of episodes are going to be like. Again, very similar to like a Super Sentai show where there's a brand new monster every single week, and it's just sort of like rinse and repeat, but I do like the fact that we're getting to know these characters a little bit more, and it seems like the story and the action is just a little more interesting, especially with the whole Chibiusa side story, which they're really slowly developing as this arc is going on. So what's the rundown? On this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal, color me impressed, this was a pretty decent episode of the series. Every single time I'm about to watch an episode of Sailor Moon Crystal, I sort of expect the worst, that it's just going to be awful. And, you know, the animation and the artwork is still nothing to write home about, but the second arc of the series, it's much more competent than the first half, and a lot of that does have to do with the villains, who I think are just way more charismatic and interesting, and I like the fact that their goal is mostly all about destruction, and I just want to learn a little bit more about them. I just do think it is a little cheesy that they're capturing all these Sailor Senshi trying to get information out of them, and they just leave them alone, like they don't ever like try to execute them or finish them off. There's just something about anime villains who never do that, and that always really bugs me, but then again, this is Sailor frickin' Moon. I don't think it's really gonna go into dark territory that much. Another thing that's really interesting about this episode is how Usagi's basically being slowly broken down as this arc is going on. Not only is she losing all of her friends, but in some ways she sort of feels that she's losing Tuxedo Mask as well to Chibiusa, who's sort of like taking all the attention away, and I think that's another interesting dynamic. Although it is kind of a drag, because we already went through a lot of that in the first arc, and then we finally got her to get all pepped up at the end, only for her to get all depressed again. Otherwise, I think the best thing about this week's episode was the battle with Sailor Mercury and Berthier, who was freaking awesome in her water powers. That was probably the best action scene of the entire series, and even still, it really wasn't all that special, but I was really glad that they were able to incorporate that, and it was just something a little different from some of the other action that I've seen from the rest of the show. On the technical side of things, this is pretty much just, again, another pretty average episode of Sailor Moon Crystal. Decent animation, decent artwork, but still, this was a fun episode of the series, and honestly, kind of gets me excited for the rest of it. And honestly, I wasn't expecting that at all. I thought this was just going to be an awful arc, but it's already way better than the first one. So all I can say is, fans of Sailor Moon, check this one out. It's pretty good, and hopefully it'll get you excited for the rest of Sailor Moon Crystal. Very nice average episode of Sailor Moon Crystal with some really great action moments at the end and a little bit of development for Sailor Mercury. Check it out, guys. Pretty good stuff. Thank you guys for watching my review. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and like the video, and please tell me what you thought about this week's episode of Sailor Moon Crystal. How did you feel about this week focusing on Sailor Mercury, and which member of the Sailor Senshi is next to be abducted by the Putty Patrol? Remember, guys, if you have not subscribed to our channel, you can do that by clicking on the channel icon right up cha. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, and you should also check out our brand new podcast show. There will be a link for that in the description box below, and you can also check out my latest review of Death Parade. I know I'm selling the hell out of that, but I got to. I gotta do it, guys. So thank you guys for watching. Super Kami Guru 9000. Out.